welcome to the Ladies' Room. I'm your host, Judy McDowell, and today it is my great pleasure to have with me Talia Carner, who is the most amazing author, activist, and involved in all kinds of women's issues and socioeconomic symposiums and seminars. You're just amazing. You're all over the place.
Well, thank you.
And now, aside from all of your short stories and magazine articles, your fourth novel, Hotel Moscow. And this is the one that's coming out of your personal experiences as a young woman being sent to Moscow to teach women business.
Mm-hmm.
So all of your other books were mostly fiction. How much of you is in this book?
It's still completely fiction. The only thing that's correct in all my novels, the settings, the historical context, the details of the time and place are completely authentic. What's different is that I experienced some of these events firsthand. I'm still not a character in any of my novels, including this one. But I did live through some of those events. For example, I was caught in the 1993 uprising of the Russian parliament against Boris Yeltsin, and was an escape from the militia, and that is documented here in the book. I also taught business to women in Russia, and I took some of those experiences to describe those in the book.
So you actually went to Russia twice in 1993.
Correct.
It was the second time that you were detained. Now, were you held in the airport the first time? Because that's very scary when Brooke gets held in the airport. And right off the bat, this is a thriller. You don't know what's going to happen to her in the airport.
It happened to me. It happened to me. I don't recall if it was the first or the second time, because this is
I don't know why you would go back after that.
24 years later. But it happened to me, except that I was caught in a jetway. You could see this guard closing the gate. He sees me, but he's supposed to close the gates. The fact that there's a person there didn't count. What did not happen was the rest of that scene. Once she was let out.
But that does happen.
It does happen, but it did not happen to me. Once I was let out of this stupid situation, I was able to join the rest of the women in the passport control and so on.
And you were sent by the U.S. Information Agency to gather information that time, or to actually start seminars with these women to teach them how to deal with the new, since the fall of the Kremlin,
The U.S. Information Agency was a government institute that sent experts around the world. At one point, I don't know when during those years, it stopped functioning this way or changed its name. But USIA, that's what they did. They did not send me to gather information, but rather they were giving information abroad.
Information to Russian women.
So I was sent, but the first time actually I went with an organization called Alliance of Russian and American Women. Mm-hmm. That was a very well organized group. Everything was very well thought through, almost as much as you can do anything when it comes to Russia.
Now, the first time, were you in a normal hotel?
No, no, I was in the Rossiya Hotel. The first time, Rossiya Hotel, which borders the Red Square. That hotel is probably the biggest that ever existed in the world. It's one building, has been since torn down. I know they are building another hotel, a whole complex right there. But the Rossiya Hotel was as Russian as you can imagine, including that floor matron that you hear, the receptionist desk. For example, situations such as they don't give you the passport back unless you pay them money.
You had to pay everybody money for everything.
Constantly, you pay money. But so that happened then. I mean, I kind of mixed my my situations. There are Russian men grabbing everywhere. You know, I've traveled around the world. I've been to Muslim countries like North Africa, Morocco, East Jerusalem. Nowhere were the men as abusive, physically attacking, pawing women as in Russia. So those experiences were non-stop in my first visit. Even as I'm mentioning, it was a very well-organized organization, but the handlers were what they were.
And they were all afraid,
Soviet,
too.
No, they were more Soviet mentality, even though they spoke English.
Well, the women handlers were afraid of the men that were in charge of them.
Yes,
like
there was,
Svetlana.
Right. We saw a situation where a boss was putting his arm around this woman, and it was, I said, let me take photographs of that because you think this is okay, and he didn't like it. We had situations nonstop. At one point, actually, the whole group had to flee the luncheon because these Russian apparatchiks that were in charge, they were showing up wherever the American sexy women were there. So they started really being abusive physically to us, and we ran into the bus. And it's funny, we had one man in the group. We were 16 women with one man who was 6'5".
Big guy.
And he stood in front of the bus when all of us went in, and he went like Tarzan. My women, my women, my women.
Oh, that's
and
so
those
funny.
two small Russian guys withdrew. But if it weren't for him, they would have followed us. But anyway, back to the second trip, October 93, I was in a very poorly organized group. Each one of us had a different sponsor, different government agency or non-for-profit organization.
So you didn't know each other before you went?
We did not know before, but we each had a complete program. For example, I gave a seminar to high school kids about business. I gave to new entrepreneurs about, this was about truth in advertising, which was as ironic as can be, because the material for that class, I provided it in English with the money that I'd received from the USIA to translate. I gave it to the handlers before we left the United States to translate.
Never made it to the translators.
To Russian and print it, because you can't find printers. So I should get a box of 100 copies. That disappeared before we even left the United States. That money was gone. So that was truth in advertising and business management. So so we each had a different program, but because we had such poor organizers in terms of whatever their ideas were, that when disaster happened, it happened in a big way.
So what were the most striking impressions that stayed with you after this whole experience?
There were, I would say, about three. One is, I mentioned the men. The other one is how valor these women were, how
the courage,
hard-working. This was the most educated group of women I've ever met in my life. I've never met as many women doctors as I met in Moscow in one day, or as many women bridge engineers as I met in one day in St. Petersburg.
Did that all happen under Gorbachev? Was Gorbachev a good guy?
No, but that time
we always think of him as kind of a good guy.
Yeltsin was the president.
Yeah, when you went.
Yes.
But these women were already educated.
Women in Russia were very well educated, but they were just as starving, and as Olga says in the book, they used us as free labor.
But under Yeltsin, could they still receive an education?
The education continued. What they could not get is
work.
One of his directives was to give all available jobs to men.
Yeah.
So yes, so they were the problem. And another huge impression that I had that left me during the uprising was as I traveled past the area of the fighting after I escaped, and I traveled through there, and I saw graffiti on the wall with Yeltsin's name. In Cyrillic, the L is a triangle, and it was made into a Jewish star. And I asked, what's this about? And they said, oh, the Jews are behind it. And that is when I understood the impact of anti-Semitism. We are being blamed again for events that have nothing to do with us. Yeltsin had fired his parliament. The parliament refused to leave, and the Jews are being blamed.
Right.
So that left a very strong impression on me, because Russia has a bloody history of pogroms that is many Americans are not aware of. And I noticed it in my writing group, where the one Jewish member said, of course, but the others didn't know about it, and I had to bring it a little bit more to the forefront, which I did through her mother, because if I didn't do through the protagonist
she keeps flashing back what her mother would say, like we all do, like your mother would say, if you don't wear your boots, you'll catch a cold, But her mother was always like, oh, there was Nazis everywhere, whatever. And Brooke changed her name because she wanted to distance herself.
Yes.
Now, her parents were Holocaust survivors?
Her father was, no, her parents were, but her mother's family came from Russia and moved west little by little, and in each place they moved, which is part of the tragedy of the Jewish world, and it's not in the book, really. It's, as they moved, disasters followed them until they were further enough west where the Holocaust caught them, meaning every few years was something else. Her father came from Czechoslovakia, which directly was
And they didn't really even speak the same language,
no,
the mother and father.
when they met in a displaced persons camp shortly after World War II, they did not speak the same language. They had a bit of Yiddish, which is the Jewish
kind of slang.
Kind of, it actually is a very cultural language. It has a very strong culture, but it unifies the Jews of Eastern Europe. But not everybody learned those languages, because if they were more secular, more modern, especially, but it's very similar to German. So if you speak German, you can at least understand Yiddish.
Oh, interesting.
It's written in Hebrew letters, but you can totally understand and have a conversation.
So what were the scariest, when the parliament rose against Yeltsin? I mean, they were elected officials, the parliament, and Yeltsin just wanted to throw them out, and did, right? So what were the scariest moments? I think you said that people had pitchforks and scythes.
Yes, unfortunately, we landed in Moscow 2 hours after the uprising had erupted.
Right.
For 2 weeks before, there was tremendous amount of tension, but the State Department had not issued a travel alert, meaning it was okay. They considered it very contained. So we got on the flight in JFK.
But then it all happened.
But then once we were in the air, it happened. On the way from the airport, already entering the city, I could see this huge mob, thousands of people fighting with the police. And when I asked the handlers, what's this? It said, oh, it's nothing. Turn the bus away. And then the next day when I called home and they told me what they saw on CNN, I told the women about it. The CNN in our hotel was in Russian and obviously censored.
They had to. Oh, that was a good hotel. That was the good hotel.
No, that was hotel. It's actually, this is like what Hotel Moscow is.
Yeah.
This is not the second time. This is now, it's really called Hotel Sputnik. But I changed the name to Hotel Moscow.
Right.
But
Yeah.
everything about the hotel that takes place is that Hotel Sputnik. That's
And it
all.
really looked like that. You had cots in the room, and
Yeah, it
there
was
were cockroaches everywhere.
Oh my
and
God! And
ripped
I
lace
tried
on the
tried to
windows.
take your first shower, and you see a sink, and you say, there's a toilet bowl, and you say, well, where's
with a
the
seat
shower?
that doesn't fit.
And then yes, of course. And then you realize that the little handheld hose from the sink, from the side of the sink, is your shower.
Do you
And
step
just
into a
stand-
little spot, or you stand
No,
right
you
there
stand
by the sink?
sink,
And the water.
and the hole for the sink is the one that the water would go into.
So the whole room gets wet.
Yeah, that's
So
the stall. That you keep your towel outside, you keep the toilet paper outside, because it's all going to get. That's
Wet.
your stall. But the cockroaches, everything was like that about the hotel. But most importantly, I think the handlers they moved back into their Soviet mode of denial of the facts, of controlling what information we could have or not have, deciding upon it. And if I tried to say, no, like one morning I said to the group, we met at breakfast and dinner. Otherwise, we all had different programs.
Yeah.
And I said to the women, did you hear tanks last night? And the handler said, no. I said, look, and I didn't want to say to them, I'm Israeli, I know my tanks. But rather, they denied that there had been tanks. So that was their approach to this.
It's very interesting how Brooke wants to distance herself from the tragedy of her families living through the Holocaust, and yet her mother's voice constantly rings through. And how did you translate growing up in Tel Aviv and bring that knowledge of the Jewish tradition and society into this novel? Did that come easily, or was that, how did you work that in?
It's very clear. It's very natural. I grew up with a lot of second generation. We call them second generation. Well, they are really first generation after the Holocaust,
Right.
but they're called second generation. And over the years in the United States, people come to me way before I even started to write fiction. But coming from Israel, they say to me, oh, my parents are Holocaust survivors. They knew, and there's immediate understanding that the Holocaust follows them like a bubble of air. And whenever I talk to them later on once the book was coming out, yes, it's part of who they are, their memories, and they're very vivid, very vivid. There hasn't been a work of fiction that deals with that, but by now there have been studies, research about the characteristics of second generations, and that is very clear that they live the trauma even if the parents don't talk about it, they get the information elsewhere, and they can see exactly what was going on.
And Brooke was a CEO or something. She's a Wall Street girl. She was a real high-powered, spiffy girl. And I think her humanity and her empathy, and it developed when she experienced what these Russian women were going through, which was extreme and brutal. And it was just awful what the mafia did to them and the high officials. I mean, Svetlana thought she was paying her mortgage, but the mafia would steal the money, and then they just kept giving her more mortgages when she already couldn't pay the first mortgages, trying to get this little company going.
What happened after the fall of communism, a lot of people don't understand, and we see it with other totalitarian regimes falling in the Middle East, and the Americans are cheering Arab Spring or whatever they think it is.
Yeah.
It is not. What happened in Russia was overnight all laws were obliterated off the books. You wake up in the morning, there are no laws.
Whoa.
And that's what happens with every fall of a totalitarian regime. You don't wake up to democracy with democratic institutions, with laws, with all of the understanding that we have, having grown not only in democracy, but with, for example, Judeo-Christian values that honor, we have some respect toward one another, we have distance, but we also negotiate. We don't have to negotiate every time you pay a bill. You don't
worry that someone's going to steal that money and it's never going to get
the $100 bill
Yeah.
is being checked for fraud, but they don't check your dollar every time against the light, because we have a certain understanding of what it is to have any exchanges, and we have a court system. It's not perfect, but we certainly have that. That did not exist in Russia after the fall of communism, and it does not exist in other totalitarian countries the morning after. So what happened with Russia was that Yeltsin, with no laws, you had chaos, you have mafia taking over in every building, every apartment building.
Now, is this during Yeltsin or after?
No, it was a day after.
The day after.
You wake up in the morning
You
now.
threw out the parliament and all bets were off.
Let's say you live in one of those mammoth apartment buildings with, I don't know, 400, 600 apartments. There will be some hoodlums that will start taking over the building.
Throw you out?
No, they don't throw you out. They start, they know that
they make you pay.
On Friday you come back with cash because they didn't have our banking system, so you get your payday. They wait for you. They know you'll come back from work and you got your money. They wait for you. And if you don't pay them,
They
beat you up.
torture you.
They do something to your family. We see Olga coming home with her groceries. They steal the groceries.
Yeah.
You had the local, the building, then you had the blocks, and then you had the neighborhood. In everywhere, you had one group of mafia on top of the other.
But they also took, like the old mansions, and divided the apartments into communal apartments where they would just have like one room for like 9 people living in one room.
Yes.
And the photos, I mean, you have photos, it just looks, and on your website, the trailer is amazing.
Yes. Going back to 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution, with the fall of the Tsar, the beginning of communism, they took over, the new government, the communist government, took over all the bourgeoisie homes, the mansions, which were in the best parts of town. It's especially true for those who visited St. Petersburg. And divided them into anthills of apartments with just rooms, tiny rooms for a family. And this is a lifetime. Now,
This is still this way today?
Millions of Russians still live like this today. The government has started back in the 1950s.
And they don't put on the heat. They only get 1 hour of heat in the morning and 2 hours at night.
Right, but I think it has to do with the idea of communism was sharing, and what it actually did was dividing everybody, because it created so much animosity among people who were stuck for a lifetime together, that it was the tragedy of the Russian people. And it's part of the psychic of the Russian people. It has to do with being squeezed and having to negotiate every square centimeter of your life in the kitchen, and a table. If there's a table in the kitchen, it's not that you use it for an hour at this time and somebody else uses another time, but rather this part of the table is yours. And when somebody else uses it, they are not allowed to use your piece. And that's how they divide their life.
And is it generally families in these tiny rooms, or they'll put other...
Both family, no, in each room will be either an individual, a couple, or if they have a child, they just don't get
But there'll be different
space.
groups in the same little apartment.
Right, there could be 10 rooms, 12 rooms, 15 rooms, and then you can have up to 30 people sharing one lavatory, one shower, one kitchen. Used to
And
be
is
one.
it still the same today? Is
So
it still relevant
millions
today?
still live like this today, and there are reasons. Some stay in there, not all of the reasons, but since the 1950s, the communist government started building those big, gigantic mammoth buildings that we see Olga lives in, that called Khrushchev's Novsky something. It's like very poorly built, but nevertheless, families got a small apartment on their own, of their own. The glass is not insulated. You can hear your neighbors. But anyway, they started, but they were very far out in the suburbs. And even today, there are many old people who remain in the communal apartments where they've lived all their lives. And the alternative
Up and down
is
the
to be
stairs.
someplace where they have no transportation, no shopping. If they're still working, they can't get to work. So yes, if they need to make a choice, they stay in those little rooms. Now you have a lot of entrepreneurs buying those out, putting them in better
Russian
apartments.
billionaires.
Yes, in order to use.
We've run out of time, but this is so interesting. This book is such an amazing read. You feel like you're there, like all of your books. You feel like you're there. It's just amazingly interesting to learn all of this stuff about Moscow and Russia in general. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Judy, for inviting me.
You're so welcome. And thank you for joining us at the Ladies' Room. Remember, ladies, give yourself lots of room. Room to read good novels, room for love, room for fun, room to grow, and room to glow. Have fun. We got a good life here, boys.
Breathe in. Now I took what I want, but you find